Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the subcommittee on the Transportation and Environment for the Appropriations Committee. We have three agencies to hear the budgets up today. This is our last budget hearing of the session, and I want to give a shout out to Delegate Beitzel, who I think this is his last budget hearing, and he's been on the subcommittee since 2009. So he's wrapping up a long tenure overseeing these agencies and departments. So we appreciate all your involvement and engagement. You're not done yet. We still have decisions to deal with, but appreciate all your work, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, why don't we turn to our first agency of the day, which is the Department of Natural Resources, and our analyst, Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 1 there, you see the operating budget summary for the Department of Natural Resources, or DNR. Fiscal 23 budget increases around $8.4 million. There's a deficient supplemental budget number 1 deficiency that kind of reduces the increase a little bit here. And it goes up to around $328.3 million for fiscal 23. In terms of the managing for results measures, Exhibit 1 reflects the riparian forest buffers. So there's a goal of 2,000 miles of riparian forest buffers in the state by 2025. It looks like it'll be difficult to get to that goal based on the current progress. However, the Chapter 645 of 2021, Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021, will help to increase the number of riparian forest buffers that are completed in the state. Exhibit 2 reflects deer management permit statistics by county. So deer management permit is one of the control measures for the deer population in Maryland by the Department of Natural Resources. Any producers out there who are experiencing any kind of damage to their products, crops, can apply for a deer management permit and then hunt year round in order to keep the predation or the kind of the consumption of the products to a low amount. In terms of how this is actually being used by counties, Allegheny County has the highest percent of tags utilized in terms of the amount of deer that can be harvested that actually are harvested. And it goes down to Charles County on the far right here in terms of a very low percentage of the actual deer are harvested that are allowed to be harvested. Some of the larger counties in terms of the overall number of tags that can be utilized are Garrett County here and Carroll County. Exhibit 3 reflects eel collection statistics at Conomingo West Eel Collection Facility. What you're seeing here is a substantial increase in the eels collected between 2020 and 2021, which is an excellent sign because eels actually carry in their gills mussels, which then can form large mussel bars or reefs that could then help to clean the water, reduce the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, hopefully coming down the Susquehanna River. Just one thing to note here that there also is an increase in the days of operation of that collection facility, but it looks like there are many more eels coming through and collected than kind of increase of a percent of days. So therefore, it really does look like a substantial increase in eels collected. Fiscal 22 deficiencies reflect a couple of programs here. The Natural Resources Police receives funding in federal funds. There's also a Critical Area Commission receives around $65,000 in general funds for salaries and for grant purposes. The big increase here is an increase of $10.7 million in general funds for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. That reflects declining revenues primarily from the short-term vehicle rental tax funding. And that's funding this general funds would then help support projects that would otherwise have to be canceled. Supplemental budget number 1 is discussed, also did bring in close to $400,000 in federal funds as well. In terms of the overview of agency spending here, the largest component of DNR's budget is the Maryland Park Service, and that's for salaries and also for the Revenue Equity Program and for pilot local payment in lieu of taxes programs. Chesapeake and Coastal Service is second here, which reflects salaries, but largely also Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund grant funding that goes out. And then you have the Natural Resources Police here, which primarily reflects salary funding. Exhibit 5 reflects the proposed budget for the agency. In terms of the personnel area here, it's around $2.7 million increase for employee and retiree health insurance, $2 million for turnover adjustments. Turnover has been reduced, allowing DNR to fill more of its vacant positions. Then you also see a $1.1 million decrease for the Forest Service, and this is reflecting money that was allocated from the dedicated purpose account, largely for electric vehicle stations. In terms of the other changes, biggest change in terms of the overall category of funding change the Maryland Park Service. A lot of enhancements for the Park Service in fiscal 23. New exhibits goes up by almost $2 million, $1.6 million for landscape restoration and master plans, $1.4 million for contractual full-time equivalents, largely funded by the transfer tax program, open space transfer tax funding. And the other components noted here is also $750,000 for the Office of Outdoor Recreation. This funding provide for a recommendation that came out of the report a couple of years ago looking at outdoor recreation economics in terms of how do we promote more of that outdoor recreation in Maryland. In terms of other components of the budget, the fishing and boating services mandate goes by $1.8 million. This reflects the fact that funding was not provided last year due to funding concerns at that point. It's a $1.2 million increase for Natural Resources Police for federal funding increases. And then the other noted here, and then there's a $10.7 million decrease due to that one-time deficiency for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund due to that revenue shortfall. And you also see, in terms of natural resources policy, around $1.5 million increase for State Highway Administration restoration projects, $1.4 million in the Forest Service for land and structure purposes, and around $3.2 million decrease for the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund, which there's $2.2 million was for dredging in fiscal 22. Then, in terms of the other changes, around $2.6 million in contractual FTEs across the agency. Personnel data, there is a decrease of half a position, regular position. This is a long-term vacant position. And there's only a slight change in the long-term vacancies, which increase from 43 to 44. And then that's about the same as last year. DNR has been able to keep the long-term vacancies down, even though its overall vacancies have gone up by virtue of its really focusing on filling those long-term vacancies, which is true for a lot of the agencies. In terms of issues, first issue here concerns the federal funding coming in for stimulus purposes from COVID-19 funding and Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. There are two tranches of funding coming in from the CARES Act funding. First one was provided around $21 million to displace the need for general funds and Natural Resources Police. That's from the Maryland Department of Health's funding. And you also had funding that came in the U.S. Department of Commerce that was administered by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. That funding was used for two purposes: $3 million for a revenue loss program for direct payments to commercial for hire aquaculture and seafood processing operations. There's also $1 million for the overall seafood marketing and business support purposes. And then DNR notes that it's dispersed, at least as of August 4th, 2021, it dispersed $3 million in direct assistance to more than 1,000 applicants, and then was working on that $1 million for seafood marketing and business support. Consolidated Administrative Appropriations Act funding also came in August 4, 2021. This really largely added on to the CARES Act funding, provided $3.4 million for similar purposes. And then there's finally the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. The law became effective November 15th, 2021. At this point, we have not seen any money coming in for the Department of Natural Resources. However, there's some potential tranches, and the department can speak more to that. The Department of Legislative Services recommends that DNR comment on the status of disbursement of that CARES Act and Consolidated Appropriations Act funding and the likelihood to receive Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. Issue 2 concerns the Maryland Park Service enhancements. As noted previously, there's a substantial increase in the amount of funding coming in from the Maryland Park Service in fiscal 23. So some of the backgrounds here: Maryland State Park visitors and capacity closures. What you're seeing is over the years, the visitors using the parks have increased from around 10 million in 2010, fiscal 2010, to 21.7 million in fiscal 21. So over this time period, substantial increase in visitors. What you're also seeing is a sort of upward trend in terms of the amount of park capacity closures, with a peak here in calendar 2020 of 292 capacity closures, which has now come down in calendar 21 to 170 closures. So still elevated, perhaps reflecting an overall long-term trend, but not quite as high as last year. Exhibit 7 reflects the Maryland State Park capacity closures by individual parks. This blue area down here at the bottom reflects the Patapsco Valley Park system, which has had 397 closures between 2010 and 2021, with then smaller closures reflected for the other parks here. Just to note, though, the Greenbrier on Western Maryland and then Assateague on Eastern Shore, reflect kind of the bookending of the park's needs in terms of capacity closures across the state, and the fact that people really seem to be interested in those water amenities. Exhibit 8 reflects the Maryland Park Service funding and personnel. Just like to highlight here that the personnel complement of regular authorized positions really hasn't changed too much since 2009. You have seen an increase though in special funds, the stippled bar here, and then over the time period, and that's the transfer tax funding largely. And you have seen a decrease in the blue bars here, and that's the general fund expenditures, which were largely phased out back in 2007 time period as a result of moving the park system more towards transfer tax. State Park Investment Commission was jointly appointed by the President and the Senate, the President of the Senate and Speaker of the House in August 2021. A number of recommendations, 40 of those came out from that commission. Legislation has now been introduced in the 2021-22 session, both houses, the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, to implement a lot of the recommendations from the commission. I'd like to highlight here the 100 new permanent positions that is required to be implemented or brought in by DNR by July 1, 2024. In terms of the other components of just addressing this, the bills currently do a great job of addressing a lot of the capital needs in terms of critical maintenance backlog, but they don't really kind of speak too much to the long-term ongoing sustainable needs for revenues for the operating side of the budget. Therefore, and then in line with that, there's also the Department of Natural Resources is opening 3 new parks in fiscal 23, which will obviously have additional operating needs. Therefore, Department of Legislative Services recommends that DNR comments on a long-term funding strategy to address the operating needs in light of the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, and to comment on the 3 new state parks proposed to be opened in fiscal 23. Issue 3 concerns Fair Hill Racetrack and special events area funding. So Fair Hill Racetrack has been upgraded in order to be able to provide for world-class amenities there in terms of steeplechase and various kind of horse events. However, this has come at a substantial expense to the Natural Resources Development Fund, one of the key components to addressing new capacity needs in the parks. $20 million was allocated for the purpose of the Fair Hill event special area in order to kind of get it up to par. As of this point, that was $20 million that came out of the Natural Resources Development Fund. There are plans, perhaps, in going forward to then repay that, but that's, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. In terms of the additional funding coming, there's a fiscal 21 operating budget bill support, fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 operating budget bill support for the Fair Hill area. That's obviously reflects ongoing needs. They have not gotten their feet underneath them in terms of being able to provide for the revenues to hopefully be able to pay back the Natural Resources Development Fund, and also no longer need necessarily the general fund support every year. Just a brief note here, the Fair Hill did host a 5-star equestrian event in October 2021. It had around 21,000 visitors. It looks like the funding has not been brought into repayment. The $7.1 million still needs to be repaid. DLS recommends that DNR comment on what guarantee that funding will actually be realized by the Natural Resources Development Fund. Fourth issue concerns the Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund. It's supported by the motor fuel tax, a portion of the motor fuel tax, and the sales and use tax on short-term rental vehicles. Have not seen the same kind of level of ongoing revenue coming in for the sales and use tax on short-term vehicle rentals, which is then needed to require the $10.7 million general fund deficiency for fiscal 22. In terms of what's happening in fiscal 23 compared to fiscal 22, Exhibit 9 reflects just one change here, an increase of $1.3 million for the Tree Solutions Now coordinator and regional foresters work. And then on the next page, commensurate $1.3 million decrease for the combined competitive grant program natural filters on public land. So no change overall in terms of their overall spending plan. DLS recommends the addition of community narrative to request that the administration continue to publish the overall Chesapeake Bay restoration data, the governor's budget books. This is data that's used in Chesapeake Bay overview. And then also recommends that language be included to restrict funding pending this submission of the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund annual work and expenditure plans. They do come in, but they do not come in time for inclusion in the Chesapeake Bay overview analysis. Recommendations, once again, restriction of $100,000 for Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund report, and then that narrative on the Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the analyst? Delegate Metzger, you trying to ask a question?
Yes. Andrew, I was just kind of curious, when we talked about the DNR last week about the helicopter, the $7 million, is that back in there, or are we going to get that?
So the $6.2 million helicopter is in DNR's PAYGO budget, and that'll be decided by the House and Capital or in Senate PAYGO capital committees.
That's all. Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Metzger. The advantage to being on the capital budget subcommittee as you are is now you get to deal with that issue as well. So I do not see any other questions for the analysts. So let's turn it over to the Department of Natural Resources and Secretary Hadaway Riccio. Madam Secretary.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. For the record, I'm Jeannie Hadaway Riccio, Secretary. Joining us virtually today is Alan Fisher, our Deputy Secretary, and I'm also joined by members of our budget team here today. We want to start by thanking the Department of Legislative Services and Mr. Andrew Gray for the analysis. And we again appreciate the opportunity to respond to the findings and recommendations. Regarding recommendation number 1, DNR is committed to continue providing the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund annual work and expenditure plan each year. We believe that a funding restriction is unnecessary since we have kept that commitment each year, and we are committed to continue to do so. Similarly, regarding recommendation number 2, our administration will continue to provide the requested data on the Chesapeake Bay. DLS asked that we comment on the status of our CARES Act funding and the likelihood of receiving federal infrastructure funding. With CARES to date, over 1,000 entities have received payments from us under the initial round of CARES funding, which totaled $3 million in direct assistance. The second round of CARES funding totaled $3.4 million, which pending final approval from NOAA will also be dispersed to the same eligible entities in the form of direct payments. As Mr. Gray mentioned, the remaining $1 million was set aside for programs to strengthen Maryland seafood markets and make them more resilient. DNR is still awaiting NOAA's approval to proceed with those plans. In terms of federal funding, what Maryland is expected to receive a significant increase, and it's still unclear what DNR may be eligible for, but we are working with the governor's infrastructure subcabinet, and we are actively monitoring opportunities to compete nationally for funds. Those opportunities could potentially include wildfire suppression, wildlife management, fish passage, dam removal, adaptation, resiliency, and habitat restoration. DLS also asked us to comment on the Maryland Park Service and the 3 new state parks proposed to be open in fiscal year 2023. The governor's allowance includes nearly $75 million for Maryland Park Service, which is a 20-year high for us. We look forward to working with the Maryland General Assembly to ensure sustainable funding support for the state park operations, and would ask the committee to please retain the funding that has been allocated. We do plan to open 3 state parks this calendar year. Activities are also underway for opportunities to expand existing state parks and create new opportunities and access in local parks. And funds have been budgeted in FY23 to study the management and staffing of Maryland Park Service and devise a park system-wide plan and strategies. So again, we would appreciate the committee's support in retaining the funding for these programs. Finally, DLS asked us to comment on the Fair Hill Foundation's progress in paying back DNR. To date, Fair Hill Foundation has been unable to repay the full amount at one time. So DNR submitted a revised and restated memorandum of understanding to the foundation in December, and that revised MOU provides a process for them to repay us the outstanding balance and payments over time. The foundation is still reviewing that MOU. And that concludes our testimony, Mr. Chair, and we are happy to answer any questions that you or the committee members may have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Can you tell us about the 3 parks?
Sure, so we're planning to open 2 on the Eastern Shore and 1 in Western Maryland.
What are they? I mean, it's exciting. It's a good thing. I'm just asking what they are and where they are. And
It is very exciting, and for the element of surprise, we would like to maybe we can provide you with some information offline, and of course we will be sure to invite everyone to join us during those times.
I didn't realize they were secret parks. I just thought I missed something. On points 1 and 2, I mean, I think the issue is not that that the department doesn't provide the data. I think the analysts acknowledge you do. It's the timing of when that data is provided. So is there anything we can do to help get the data provided in a more timely fashion to address the concern from DLS?
Understood. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for that distinction, and we will make every attempt to get the information in a more timely fashion in the future.
Delegate Beitzel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, how you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Delegate. How are you?
Okay. We've had a problem, with the pandemic. You know that everyone wants to get out in our state parks and get out in the wild, and obviously all the parks have been pretty much capacity, and there's a need for more expansion of their facilities and everything else. But we have a situation in Garrett County you're well aware of, because we called you out there and we met you at the Youghiogheny River, at the bridge that goes across the Youghiogheny River that is necessary to get across and to go to Swallow Falls and Harrington Manor without going miles and miles around. And plus, if we have to take the temporary bridge that's there on top of the old bridge that's really was condemned, that means maybe up to 18 months or more people not being able to get through there. And there's a real issue of getting, and I'm sure you've probably heard it from the Senate and Senator Edwards and others, but I just wanted to bring it up here to ask you to do everything you can do to expedite everything that's necessary that we can get that bridge rebuilt there in Garrett County across the Youghiogheny River.
Well, thank you, Delegate. We are definitely committed to working with the county on the bridge project. The county hired a consultant a few years ago, and they were presented with 6 potential construction options for the bridge. I met with them as recently as last week at the PACE reception to talk about those various options. And it's my understanding that the county is meeting today to try to select which path they would like to move forward. But irregardless of which construction path they choose, we stand ready to assist in any way that we can.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And then one other question, I know with the money that's coming in to provide additional facilities and access to the state parks, we have some trails that we've been working on a long time in Garrett County. I mean, a long time, going clear back to Delegate D. Corsi Bolden, who was previous to then Delegate Edwards and then Senator Edwards now. And there's plans and proposals and to put a trail up through the Youghiogheny corridor up to the canyon, go from Friendsville, eventually all the way into Oakland, and that would tie even into Allegheny Passage, which would add a lot of really scenic and wonderful and views. And I just wonder, we just ask for your support in assisting to get some of that stuff accomplished out there in Youghiogheny River canyon and that old railroad tram that you looked at from the Swallow Fall Bridge and walked down a portion of that. So appreciate your ask for your assistance on that also.
Yes, thank you for the site visit that day. It's always great to be able to get out in Western Maryland. If you recall, we were joined by Daryl Anthony that day. At that time, he was there as a stakeholder. Of course, now he is our executive director of the Office of Outdoor Recreation. So this is a project that is on his radar as well as mine, and we look forward to working with you and the stakeholders to see if we can make it a reality.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Weitzel. Delegate Metzger.
Yes, thank you, Madam Secretary. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well. Thank you, Delegate. How
Okay.
about yourself?
This is a question. As you know, I'm dealing with a farm, a 400-year-old farm in my district, and we're having a situation, and I'd like for you to call me later on if you wouldn't mind, please. I'm sure the
I would be
senators
glad
talked
to.
to you about it. Mhm.
Yes, I would be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Any further questions for the Secretary? Okay, Madam Secretary, I do have one other question, which is just, even if we just adopt the governor's budget as is, to say nothing of these various other pieces of legislation that we've heard about, there's going to be some pretty exciting work going on with the parks critical maintenance backlog. So just curious how you all are doing in staffing up the engineering and construction elements you'll need to undertake more of that work.
So we are doing very well. We are staffing up. We hope to be fully staffed by the fall, and that will help us to significantly reduce that backlog. I would just mention that, and I have said this in testimony in other committees as well, in terms of entirely eliminating the backlog within a couple year time frame, it's difficult to predict that because projects are constantly added to the list as new things come up, and we're constantly triaging, especially if there are emergency circumstances. So we do feel that we are going to be able to aggressively address the backlog, and we appreciate everyone's support in helping us to be staffed up.
Great. And what does full staffing mean in that case? I mean, what's the vacancy? How many people is that approximately?
So I believe we're adding 2 additional.
Do you want to send that to me after?
4 vacancies. Yeah, let me get back to you on that. I think we're filling 4 vacancies by fall, but I don't want to quote the wrong number. So I'll get you that information, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I do not see any other questions for the department. We do have one piece of public testimony. We're joined by Tim Casey of Friends of the Maryland State Parks. Mr. Casey, I believe the requirement is that you have 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. My name is Tim Casey with the Friends of Maryland State Parks. We'd like to particularly thank this committee for its long-standing support for Maryland State Parks. We advocate full funding for the governor's 2023 program open space and Maryland Park Services operating budget appropriations. These funding sources allow the Park Service to fulfill its mission of visitor enjoyment, conservation and education services, and resource preservation for 75 state parks and 140,000 acres of public lands. Surveys of Maryland citizens continue to rate state parks very high for quality of life, such as 1, their natural, historic, and cultural resources; 2, their contribution to a conservation ethic; 3, enabling family values and cohesion, especially as seen during the pandemic; 4, promoting a healthy lifestyle through recreational opportunities; 5, improving air quality and pollution control, as well as water quality as an offset to climate change. Thousands of volunteers contribute hundreds of thousands of hours of service valued at nearly $6 million annually. This is a very, very conservative figure. They provide skills, training, expertise, diversity, and advocacy for our state parks. State parks are a major contributor to Maryland's economy by annually generating $18 million in visitor revenue and a $29 to 1 return on investment relative to the Park Service operating budget. That yields $1.3 billion of economic impact. State parks are a truly great investment for Maryland across quality of life and economic dimensions. Please support the FY 2023 funding appropriations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Any questions? Great. Well, thank you again for joining us, and thanks again to the Department of Natural Resources and Secretary Hadaway Riccio and Andrew Gray. We will now turn to our next agency, which is the Maryland Transportation Authority, and our analyst, Kelly Norton. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You should see my screen now. Here we have the Maryland Transportation Authority's operating budget for fiscal 23. It is increasing $33.7 million or 7.2% to $499.5 million. The capital budget will be increasing $25.9 million to $599.1 million in fiscal 2023. MDTA has a goal of collecting 80% of its tolls through Easy Pass. In fiscal 21, 92.7% of tolls were collected through Easy Pass. MFR data has that continuing to grow. However, MDTA has noted that the fiscal 2021 Easy Pass collection percentage is higher than a typical year due to the pausing of the notice of toll due mailings. In fiscal 2022, Easy Pass collection percentage is likely to be artificially decreased as the paused video tolls are collected and increased video toll collections occur as a result of MDTA's approved customer assistance plan, as well as fiscal 23 Easy Pass collections are anticipated to resume in a normal manner. COVID-19 has had an effect on toll traffic and toll revenues. On page 6, Exhibit 2 shows the amount of toll traffic and toll revenues. The axis on the left should read traffic in millions. Total traffic revenue fell to $455.9 million in fiscal 21 from $584.6 million in fiscal 2020. 2021's revenue was impacted by a decrease in toll traffic as well as the delay in collecting certain toll transactions. The operating budget increases $33.7 million. That is mostly due to a $33.2 million increase in debt service for fiscal 23. On page 9, Exhibit 4 shows the sources of funding for the operating capital budgets. The primary source is toll revenues with $736.1 million or 67%. We can see on page 10, Exhibit 5 shows 54% of this funding will go towards the capital program. I'll now turn to revenues and debt affordability. Toll revenues are the primary revenue source for the agency. It expects to collect $822.9 million in fiscal 22 and $736.1 million in fiscal 23. Exhibit 6 shows the bond sales and debt outstanding for the agency. Outstanding debt is expected to be $2.3 billion in fiscal 23 and stay below the $3 billion statutory limit into the foreseeable future at approximately $2.5 billion. MDTA is authorized to issue bonds without obtaining the consent of any unit or agency in the state as long as the bonds outstanding do not exceed $3 billion of the end of any year. NDTA has additional financial standards. First, the rate covenant compliance ratio requires the ratio of net revenues to the amount deposited to the maintenance and operating reserve account plus 120% of debt service be at least 1.0. The fiscal 23 rate covenant compliance ratio is projected to be $2.5 billion. The fiscal 23 rate covenant compliance ratio is projected to be 2.5. Second, the debt service coverage ratio, which is a ratio of net revenues to debt service, must be at least 2.0. It is expected to be 3.1 in fiscal 23. There is a decline in this ratio that will be discussed later in issue 3 of this analysis. Last financial standard is the maintaining of $350 million in unencumbered cash. The unencumbered cash is projected to be $544.5 million, or about 13 months of operating expenses in fiscal 2023. MDTA also issues debt on behalf of other state agencies in projects, also called non-recourse debt. On page 14, Exhibit 7 shows the debt service and debt outstanding for the non-recourse debts. Debt service payments are expected to be $33.7 million in fiscal 23, and debt outstanding should be $302.3 million. Turning to personnel, MDTA eliminated 20 vacant toll collector positions due to the transition to the all-electronic toll or cashless tolling system. On page 16, Exhibit 8 shows the pay-go allowance for the 2022 through 2027 Consolidated Transportation Program, or CTP. The MDTA CTP totals $2.8 million with reduced capital spending from fiscal 24 through fiscal 27 due to the expected completion of the deck rehabilitation on the eastbound span of the Bay Bridge, the Nice Middleton Bridge, and phase 1 of I-95 Express Toll Lanes Northern Extension Project. On page 17, Exhibit 9 has the capital funding of major projects by MDTA facility. I-95 has the largest portion with 47% or $240 million in fiscal 23. Exhibit 10 shows the list of capital projects in the CTP. It goes on from page 18 through page 19. There is $599.1 million programmed in the CTP for fiscal 23. The total cost for these projects is expected to be $5.7 billion, and the 6-year cost is expected to be $2.8 billion. The first issue is the Office of Legislative Audit's audit of MDTA. The audit had 2 findings, the most concerning being that MDTA did not determine the impact of electronic toll collection system issues on its customers and did not identify and correct certain related customer overbillings. OLA reported multiple instances of overbilling at toll facilities due to problems with tolling equipment. In total, there was $481,000 in errors with $67,000 in credits given to customers. Despite the low error rate, there are questions remaining regarding the accuracy and monitoring of the toll system. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that MDTA conduct an accuracy study of the tolling equipment at its tolling facilities and submit a report on MDTA's process to ensure significant tolling issues are swiftly identified and resolved in the future. The second issue is the ongoing backlog of toll transactions. MDTA paused the collection of video tolls from March of 2020 to October of 2020 as a pandemic relief action. MDTA mailed out notices of tolls due or NOTDs after this period ended. The agency has opted to not impose all of the tolls at once on customers and is using a metering strategy. In addition to video tolls being paused, there was a pause in collection of Easy Pass tolls at the ICC in June of 2020. The posting of tolls to customers' accounts and the mailing of NOTDs has led to a dramatic increase of calls to the call center. On page 22, Exhibit 12 shows the monthly call volumes from February 21 through January 22. March 21 and April 21 are not included due to the transitioning to a new vendor. The calls peaked in November at 131 calls to the call center. This, of course, led to the call volume increase and led to a call wait time increase, This also peaked in November at 163 minutes, up from the average of 2.5 minutes before the backlog. The call center has dealt with hiring and retention issues, which has exacerbated the call wait time issue. Staffing at the call center has grown from 60 call agents to 163. MDTA should comment on the ongoing backlog, including an update on the hiring of call agents and whether it's on track to meet its timeline of processing the backlog by summer of 2022. The final issue is the fiscal stress report that was requested in the 21 session. The report was requested because there was a concern that MDTA's unencumbered cash might be within $5 million of the $350 million standard beginning in fiscal 23. Therefore, a financial forecast from 2021 through 2031 was requested. Exhibit 15 on page 25 shows that the unencumbered cash is now not projected to fall within $5 million of the standard until fiscal 24. The forecast does show that the debt service coverage ratio will fall below MDTA's 2.0 ratio standard in fiscal 2030, prompting the need to raise toll rates by 33 cents. The fiscal stress report was written under the assumption that the Nice-Milton Bridge would receive TIFIA funding, but the approval of the loan became tenuous this past fall into winter. MDTA should comment on the status of TIFIA loan application and how its financial forecast will be affected if this loan is not approved. The pandemic has had a negative impact on the overall financial forecast. Latest forecast estimates a $400 million decrease from fiscal 2020 through fiscal 29, which is below the financial forecast released in October 2019. However, the pandemic and delayed toll collection had an unexpected positive impact on fiscal 22's toll revenue, which is expected to be $822.9 million, $151.1 million increase from 2021 sessions projections. While MDTA does not have information for video tolls collected for the $458.6 million in Easy Pass tolls collected through January 31st, 2022, 74.5 million or 16.2% came from delayed toll collections. MDTA should comment on the possibility of a toll increase in fiscal 2030 and whether alterations to current capital plans could be made to avoid the financial stresses reflected in the forecast. In summation, DLS is recommending adopting the following narrative of a report on tolling concerns. It should include an accuracy study of the tolling equipment at its tolling facilities that covers a 1-week period and details the occurrences of overbilling of drivers and cause of said overbillings. The report should also include details on MDTA's process to ensure significant tolling issues are identified, stopped, and fixed. The pay-go is non-budgeted. There is no action. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the analyst? Okay, well, with that, we can turn to the department and the authority. Of course, as always, we have Secretary Ports and the Acting Executive Director of the Maryland Transportation Authority, Mr. Pines. Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, good afternoon, Chairman Corrin, members of the subcommittee. For the record, again, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary for Maryland Department of Transportation. And of course, I want to thank DLS Budget Analyst Kelly Norton for her work throughout the year. I'm joined today, as you mentioned, by Will Pines, Acting Executive Director of Maryland Transportation Authority. But before turning it over to Will to address the DLS analysis, I'd like to highlight several important events that occurred over the last year. Despite the continued challenges associated with COVID-19, the MDTA maintained its financial standards while funding multiple system preservation program and expansion projects. The MDTA successfully replaced its only structural deficient bridge in 2021. That's the I-895 bridge project. It was not only delivered ahead of schedule, but was also under budget. This is very similar to the westbound Bay Bridge deck overlay project, which we finished a year early. Additionally, the I-895 bridge over Patapsco Flats received the MDQI's Project of the Year Award for replacement of the bridge over the Patapsco Flats. And we're also very excited to report that we're on time and on budget for both the I-95 ETLs or express toll lanes, northbound extension, and the nice Middleton Bridge projects. In addition to these great accomplishments, however, there were some challenges stemming from the COVID-19 toll rollback with numerous new video toll customers from the switch to all electronic tolling and to the new toll collection system transition. To date, we made a lot of progress in these areas and we're continuing to work with our customers to address our concerns. And in that regard, I'm pleased to announce that the MDTA board recently approved a customer assistance plan that includes a civil penalty waiver grace period that waives all civil penalties for customers who pay their unpaid tolls by November 30th. I shared more details with the customer service assistance plan with the entire legislature earlier this week, along with the information that you can provide to your constituents to help resolve some of the most common issues regarding toll and billing inquiries. The deferral of toll bills during the pandemic protected Marylanders from the hardship during one of the greatest health and economic emergencies of our lifetimes. But we realize paying off those bills now can be a challenge for many families. So the customer assistance plan gives Marylanders more than 9 months to pay toll bills without having to worry about additional penalties or other consequences. And with that, I'll turn it over to Will Pines to provide additional information about the customer assistance plan and to address the DLS analysis.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Corman and members of the subcommittee. As Jim mentioned, I'm Will Pines, Acting Executive Director of the Maryland Transportation Authority. And while I'm new to this position, I've been with the department for 18 years, working my way up the ranks from a bridge engineer at State Highway to several leadership roles at MDTA over the last 10 years, including the former chief engineer and chief operating officer. Just as 2020 was not an easy year for the transportation sector, 2021 was no exception as we continued to endure the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. With that being said, I'm pleased to report that the MDTA continued to weather through the financial challenges associated with the pandemic, while also protecting the safety and welfare of our employees and customers. Transportation issues touch each of us, and I am proud to be part of an agency that seeks to provide the best facilities and customer experience for the traveling public now and into the future. Now I'd like to thank Ms. Norton for her work. We concur with the report recommendations and will now address the areas of the DLS analysis where we were requested to comment. On page 23 of the analysis, DLS requested that we comment on the ongoing backlog, including an update on hiring of call agents and whether we're on track to meet our timeline for processing the backlog by summer of 2022. Like other businesses and agencies nationwide, the MDTA and our call center vendor have been significantly impacted by the staffing shortages, retention challenges, and COVID-19 related quarantining and absences. As shown in Exhibit 13 on page 23, call wait times are declining with the increases in staffing. We now have over 200 call agents, up from 63 in November. However, we recognize that there's more work to be done to further reduce call wait times. In response to the requests of the MDTA board, Governor Hogan, and MDTA customers, the MDTA board approved a customer assistance plan at the last board meeting that gives customers until November 30th to pay all tolls without the worry of consequences. It waives late fees for each paid tolls and will reduce call center wait times even further. Secretary Ports shared details of this program with all of the legislature to share with constituents, along with a recommended letter to help elected officials share with constituents the most challenging tolling challenges. The most common challenges, that is. Lastly, the MDTA is well on its way to eliminating the backlog of transactions. The processing of backlog transactions is 99% complete for Easy Pass transactions and 91% for posting of video and image toll transactions to customers' accounts, with the mailing of notices of toll due expected to be mailed by summer of 2022. Now, on page 24 of the analysis, DLS requests that we comment on the status of the TIFIA loan application. MDTA is also asked to comment on the possibility of a toll increase in fiscal 2030 and whether alterations to the current capital plans could be made to avoid the financial stresses reflected in the forecast. Regarding the TIFIA loan application, I'm pleased to report that on February 16th, the MDTA was advised that the Nice Middleton Bridge TIFIA loan allocation was recommended by the U.S. DOT Credit Council for approval, and the application is now awaiting final approval by the DOT. Regarding the possibility of a future toll increase in fiscal 2030 and whether alterations to the capital plans could be made to avoid the financial stresses reflected in the forecast, the MDTA's responsibility to operate and maintain Maryland's toll facilities requires a strategic approach that avoids significant capital system preservation and expansion costs from clustering into a narrow time frame. As such, the MDTA deploys strategies such as asset lifecycle reviews, long-range needs analysis, and planned debt service cycles. The MDTA strategically issues debt in managed cycles to entail periods of temporary increased financial leverage to accomplish our major capital projects, followed by years of declining debt and fewer new money finances. Currently, reducing the MDTA capital budget would come with a great risk and cost, given that nearly 3/4 of the 6-year capital budget is already under contract. Future possibilities of capital program reductions will depend on the conditions and statewide priorities. For example, the MDTA will be concluding the NEPA Tier 1 study for the Bay Bridge in March. And while funding has not been identified, several counties have already requested funding prioritization to advance the NEPA Tier 2 study. The MDTA anticipates that several counties will include this request in their priority letters, which are due on April 1st. As noted in the MDTA responses, a future toll increase is nearly a decade away, may be required to adhere to the agency's financial standards, and that irrespective of mitigation actions, future potential toll rate increases may be periodically necessary due to inflation or to support long-term population or economic-driven system expansion. Biennially, the MDTA board adopts a 6-year financial forecast, which ensures that sufficient revenues are available to meet the agency's operating and capital budget needs while maintaining the agency's financial coverage ratio. The MDTA can leverage its stable and experienced leadership team to develop mitigation plans and strategies to alleviate financial challenges. And with that, we want to thank the committee for your time and are happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Director. I have to say it is bizarrely convenient that 7.5 years after cutting tolls, all of a sudden it looks like, oh, maybe we will need to raise tolls in the future. It's really fascinating timing. Can I ask, what's the current wait time at the call centers?
So we just recently reported out to the board that our wait times were around the 45-minute mark, but I actually, they are declining. I actually hopped on this morning. I've checked twice today, anticipating this question. I checked at 8:45 and received an estimated wait time of 30 minutes. And then I checked again at 12:28, just prior to this meeting, and the estimated wait time at that point was 19 minutes.
Terrific. What was the I guess I'll use the pandemic as sort of the proxy, the pre-pandemic sort of normal wait time?
Yeah, our average wait times pre-pandemic were 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, how are you today? I still trying to get the answer to my second question that I had asked in an earlier meeting, and that is, actually, let me expand. If this weren't post-pandemic, and if you did not have all of the pandemic problems, how is your toll collection going? And specifically with respect to businesses, you know, freight trucks and things like that, because my recollection is that they're the ones who failed to pay their bills in an ongoing manner.
So I'm sorry, Jim, did you want to jump on that first, or?
No, I could real quickly, Will. I would say that is a bigger problem for us. They are some of our largest customers. So when they do not pay, you're talking about a significantly larger amount of money that they would owe. But real quickly, Mr. Chairman, I just do want to address the one thing that you said about 7.5 years after we reduced tolls. I would suggest that even now, this is probably one of the longest periods of time without a toll increase. As a matter of fact, the previous administration, if I'm not mistaken, had 3 toll increases over an 8-year period. Some so significant, and we were able to reduce the tolls for hardworking families and put that money back in their pockets. And we're still looking at many years out before a potential toll increase could occur. So I just wanted to make sure we answered that. But go ahead, Will, answer the rest of the delegates' questions.
And let me follow up on that with following up what the secretary said. What measures are you taking to enforce, to get the money from those delinquents?
So a couple of things. So big picture, talking about where are we with tolling. So as was kind of noted in Exhibit 2 of the report, we are generally on track this year in FY22. We've been reporting out on where we are from a traffic standpoint and with toll collection, and we're aligned pretty well with our financial forecast. So in terms of not generating the revenue that's anticipated, I hope I alleviated it.
No, I don't care about your balanced budget, because what I care about is people paying the bills that they owe. So if they pay them, you might have a surplus.
Right. So related to debt collections, you mentioned out of state and commercial vehicles is the biggest challenge. Where we, through some legislation a few years back, we were given the ability to develop our own collections RFP. That's very, very near to advertising. And with that procurement, we would have a collections contractor that would allow us to pursue collections from those out-of-state vendors.
So you don't have any, there used to be in-state things that you could do with flagging. I don't know that you'd want to do that with trucks, but that certainly is a way to get things paid on time.
So in-state you're correct. There are actions we can take with the MVA in terms of vehicle suspensions and flaggings. And then secondly, we can work with central collections unit to go after, violators. And in terms of both in-state and out-of-state, we do have the ability to still work with them.
But are you doing it?
Yes, we are. Now with the customer assistance plan, escalations to MVA and CCU are temporarily paused, which is a key component of the program to create that 9-month grace period.
But that's for, I believe, normal citizens. I'm talking about the big ticket items with the commercial truckers. I love truckers, but they need to pay their tolls. Are you pursuing anything separately to get them to do so?
So during the grace period, the customer assistance plan, there was no distinction made between individuals versus businesses and commercial vehicles. The grace period applies to anyone who had received a video toll and civil penalty. So we would pursue those actions after the board approved customer assistance plan ends.
Thank you.
Delegate Kittleman, we now know the punchline to the old joke: 3 MDTA executive directors walk into a subcommittee. So thank you. Any other questions for the department or the agency? Great. Well, we can now turn to the State Highway Administration, our analyst, Steve McCulloch. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McCulloch with Legislative Services, here to present the State Highway Administration budget. Beginning with the operating budget, the fiscal 2023 budget increases by $22 million or 7.2%. The capital budget, which we will talk about a little bit more in depth in a minute, increases by $32.8 million or 2.5%. Turning now to the managing for results measures. The first one looks at traffic fatalities and traffic fatality rates. So this chart, the bars show the number of annual traffic fatalities. The black line is the goal, and the red line is the fatality rate, which measures fatalities per 100 million miles traveled. So you can see that in fiscal 2020, the rate jumped quite substantially. Some of that is due to the fact that while the number of fatalities actually increased, at the same time, the number of miles traveled decreased. So that resulted in that big jump. Exhibit 2 shows the number of vehicle miles traveled in congested conditions during the evening peak hour, with the blue bars representing travel on freeways and expressways, and the pink bars representing the travel on arterials. As you can see in fiscal 2020, when the pandemic first hit and vehicle miles traveled really dropped, that also greatly reduced the number of, or percent of vehicle miles traveled in those congested conditions. It's interesting to note that by 2022, the department is expecting that vehicle miles traveled in the peak evening will return close to pre-pandemic levels for highways and expressways. Exhibit number 3 shows the percentage of bridges in the state highway network with one or more components rated poor or worse. This is the new rating system that replaced the old discussion of structurally deficient bridges. And on this measure, Maryland has always done quite well compared to its sister states across the nation. In fiscal 2021, there was just over 1% of the state's state-owned bridges that had any component rated poor or worse. Exhibit 4 shows the percent of highway network in overall preferred maintenance conditions. And this is interesting in that this was met for 4 years from 2017 to 2020 and just missed in 2021. And I'd say that's interesting because for individual projects that have been mentioned before in some of these hearings, like the Bay Bridge, where the decrease in traffic actually allowed an acceleration of that particular project, for the whole system, that was not the case. And the department points to the fact that early in the pandemic, social distancing required the number of staffing in the shops to be decreased by half. So they're only having half the staff come in on any given day. And that hindered their ability to get that maintenance for the entire network up to the goal in 2021. Turning now to agency spending. Exhibit 5 shows that SHA depends almost equally on its own personnel, including contractual employees and contractual services for delivering its service and maintenance. The proposed budget, as I indicated at the beginning, increases by $21.2 million or 7.2%. The employee portion of the budget increases by about $1.2 million net, driven mostly by health and retiree health insurance contributions. The remaining increase is largely due to operating engineering contracts and equipment rental related to road maintenance. And the next section, talking about winter snow removal, accounts for $5 million of that increase. In 2020, the budget committees and ultimately General Assembly adopted language expressing intent that the department budget its snow removal expenses at the 5-year actual levels leading up to the most current actual year. For the last couple of years, the department had flat funded that level at $71 million, but the fiscal 2023 allowance increases it by the $5 million indicated in the language, intent language. And that happens to coincide with the 5-year average expenditures ending in fiscal 2021, which totaled 75.3. So going forward, if the department maintains budgeting at that 5-year actual, there will be no required $5 million increase. It'll just be whatever that actual is. Turning to the personnel, there are no changes in regular positions for either the operating or the PAYGO portions of the budget. On the budget contractual side, they're down by 10.5 contractual FTEs. Exhibit 7 turns now to the capital program, and the first part looks at state aid. This is the highway user revenues, grants, and Exhibit 7 shows the working and the allowance for highway user revenues distributions, and that increases in the allowance by $10.2 million, simply a reflection that the underlying revenues that are deposited into the gasoline and motor vehicle revenue account are increasing relative to the current year. Exhibit 8 shows the highway user capital grant allocations for the counties and the municipalities by county, and that's there for your reference. Exhibit 9 then turns to the 6-year capital program for SHA, and this shows the 6-year funding planned spending by investment category. And this shows that system preservation is the largest component of spending in the capital program, during this 6-year program, as would be expected for almost any capital program for transportation. Exhibit 10 shows the cash flow changes between the 22 budget as introduced in the 22 current working budget. That is increased by $215 million, with the greatest area of increase being system preservation and minor projects. Similarly, the increase between the current year working appropriation and the allowance is the $32.8 million that I mentioned at the top of the presentation. And again, the largest change there is system preservation and minor projects. Exhibit 11 is a multiple page exhibit that shows major projects funded by county. In order to make this exhibit, the project had to have at least $1 million in the fiscal 2023 allowance, or 6-year funding of $5 million or more. So if you are aware of a project in your county that is not on this list, it probably does not fit one of those two criteria, but that does not mean it's not being funded in the current program. Exhibit 12 shows the changes since last CTP. So the top level shows the projects that were new to the construction program. The middle section shows the projects that were moved from the development and evaluation to the construction program. And then the bottom part of this table shows the new projects that are added to the development and evaluation program that in future years would then be moved up into the construction program. Turning now to the issues, the first issue relates to the work zone safety program. Last year, the committees adopted committee narrative asking SHA to report on the measures it uses to keep its workers safe, including those workers who work in trenches. SHA submitted a report that outlined its work zone safety program that has 4 elements: engineering, enforcement, training, and education. And the Exhibit 13 shows the items that fall under each of these categories. Exhibit 14 shows the work zone crashes and fatalities, with the shaded portions of the graph showing the crashes. The blue are property only crashes, and the pink include or denote injury crashes. The 2 lines are fatalities. The yellow line represents construction worker fatalities in work zones, and the red line denotes non-worker fatalities that occurred in crashes occurring in work zones. The second issue is a discussion on congestion pricing, a key component of the Op Lanes Maryland project to add toll lanes along I-270 and 495. Is a congestion pricing model where the toll rates will vary based on the level of congestion. The Federal Highway Administration indicates that there are basically 3 types of congestion pricing models that are in use in the United States or being considered. The first type is the variable price lanes, and that is exactly what the Op Lanes Maryland project represents, and the Northern Virginia hot lanes. These are lanes that operate next to free lanes where people can travel without paying a toll. The second type of congestion pricing occurs for an entire facility. This would include a toll ridge or a bridge where the entire facility is tolled and there's no method of using that facility without paying a toll. And the third type, which is not yet in use in the United States, but is in use in other parts of the world, including London as an example, is where drivers are charged to drive into a congested area, generally a downtown area. In the United States, New York City is considering imposing a cordon charging system where people driving into Manhattan during rush hour would incur a charge. While congestion pricing may be a good tool for addressing congestion, it can have negative impacts, especially on low-income users, especially if there are limited or no opportunities to avoid the paying of a toll. There are methods of addressing those impacts, and we've asked MDOT to comment generally on where congestion pricing could be used throughout the state on existing state roads and facilities, and identify any impediments that would need to be overcome in order to allow that, and also to identify any federal regulations or laws that would prohibit the use of congestion pricing. Issue number 3 is the Maryland toll lane project. This was covered in the overview, but since that time, the Circuit Court in Montgomery County has issued a ruling that indicated that the department would need to judge on the merits 3 of the 4 arguments that the protest bidder had made in its arguments. In its original rulings on that protest, MDOT had denied it all of the points based on a timeliness issue, saying that the bidder had not filed timely. So we've asked MDOT to update the committee on the status of the bid protest, of the likely timing of its consideration and determination on the elements of the protest that the court did rule to be timely, and to indicate whether the current work on that project will proceed in the face of this protest and the court action. Issue number 4 is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This was covered in the overview, so I will not repeat that here. That takes us to the recommendations, which for the operating and the capital budget is to concur with the governor's allowance. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. I do have a question, not for you to answer right now, but maybe for you to look at and get back to us, which is just looking back at the work zone protection issue.
Yes.
The number of fatalities, particularly 7 construction workers, just strikes me as high over that period. So I was curious if we could compare to some peer states to see if we're, how we're, obviously 7 is too many no matter what, but I am curious to see if others are in that same kind of range. Is that something we can?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is the 7 would be the non, or you're talking total, I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, 7 was the construction worker fatalities, right?
Yellow is the construction worker. So the red is the non.
The number is 7 though, based on the paragraph. 7, not yellow, 7. 7 construction worker fatalities. That's what your
total
narrative says.
Yes, over this entire period.
Yep. That still strikes me as high.
Okay, so there's none in 19. There were, 2 in each year, 1 in 16. So,
Yeah.
But I will compare.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And that's not something we need immediately, but I'm just kind of curious.
Sure.
Other questions for the analyst? I do not see any, so I believe we can turn back to Secretary of Ports as well as the Administrator of the State Highway Administration, Administrator Smith. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Administrator, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Again, good afternoon, Corman Chairman. Chairman Corman, members of the committee. It's the last one we had together. We got. I'm starting to tear up a little bit. Anyway, for the record, my name is Tim Ports, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation, and with me today is Tim Smith, Administrator for Maryland Highway Administration. We're glad to be here today to share some of MDOT SHA's achievements. As always, I would like to thank DLS analyst Steve McCulloch for the work he's done in understanding of MDOT. Despite the challenges of the pandemic and collateral impacts, our transportation team has worked diligently to keep the nation's supply chain moving and our construction projects on track. Providing innovative congestion relief solutions is vital to reducing travel times, improving our quality of life, and spurring economic recovery. One of the projects focused on accomplishing that goal is the Baltimore Region's Transportation Systems Management and Operations Project. This project will help relieve congestion along I-695 between I-70 and Maryland 43 by providing an additional lane during peak travel times. Over on the I-270 part of the world, we reached a major milestone in August on our innovative congestion management project, which utilizes the first use of ramp metering in Maryland. Ramp metering is a proven cost-effective tool to help address congestion and improve safety by regulating traffic flow onto the highway. And we're looking into the future with a focus on preserving what we have, planning for future projects, and building on what we can further support Maryland's economy. Now, with that, I'll turn it over to Tim Smith.
Thank you, Secretary. Good afternoon, Chair Corman and members of the committee. As Secretary mentioned, Tim Smith, it's a pleasure to be here. I just want to quickly start out with a shout out to recognize my team. Our frontline maintenance staff have showed really kind of the rest of our organization what it means to put our SHA team and our mission first, especially over the last 2 years with the pandemic. And I think that's really been seen through this past winter and the last 2 winters, to be honest with you. So we've had a total of 7 statewide events this winter. We've averaged 28 inches of snow if you look across all our shops across the state. Obviously, the folks out west deal with a little more. At Kaiser's Ridge, we've had 82 inches of ice and snow. But one of those was just our strong nor'easter that hit Ocean City, and our staff there doesn't always have the equipment that we need for that type of 10 to 12 inches. So we redeployed some crews and equipment from other regions that were not as affected to help our brothers and sisters down in the lower eastern shore. So I, for one, am ready for winter to conclude, and I'm hoping these last 2 days of 70-plus-degree weather continue. But I know March is tricky in Maryland. So as we kind of get ready for spring, we know it will bring people to engage in more recreational activities, as we heard from about DNR earlier, and allow folks to walk and bike on the roadside. So we have these highway users in mind as we continue to dedicate more resources to improving safety for our vulnerable users. So over the last 5 years, 25% of our fatalities on Maryland roadways have come from bikes and peds. So for us to achieve a Vision Zero goal as a state, we must dedicate additional focus in this area. So we're building a shelf of projects focused on improving accessibility and safety for our vulnerable users. And as those larger projects are kind of making their way through the assembly line, we've already implemented 270 operational improvements that we can through our districts across the state. So implementing a Vision Zero improvements along with preserving our infrastructure as well as relieving congestion, as Secretary mentioned, are really the 3 categories of focus for state highways. So pivoting to the DLS analysis, I also want to express my appreciation to Steve McCulloch and DLS for his effort, his partnership and recommendations. His work and perspective always is valuable to us and makes us better as an organization. Regarding the DLS recommended actions for operating budget as well as our PAYGO budget, we obviously concur. We also provided written response to the specific questions raised through the DLS analysis by Mr. McCulloch. Since they were more narrative in nature, we've kind of let those written responses stand on their own, but thank you for your patience and be happy to respond to any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Any questions from my colleagues? Delegate Kittleman.
My cat is interfering. Hi, I just wanted to inquire about, you were talking about the bicycles and the accidents. Howard County, I would bet, leads the state on people bicycling, although maybe someplace it's flatter beats us out. But offline sometime, could you give me an idea of how many of the accidents are in Howard County and how we compare to the rest of the state?
Absolutely, be happy to.
Thank you.
Great. I do have some questions, Mr. Administrator. I'll start on a similar note to Delegate Kittleman, which is there are a number of programs that are sort of Vision Zero related that I know you're very familiar with. ADA retrofit, bicycle retrofit, safety and spot improvements, sidewalk program, and traffic management. Given that there's a formula funding increase coming for federal highway aid, assuming to get ahead of Ports Secretary or Secretary Ports, I'm just going to get ahead of his point. Yes, we need a long-term federal appropriation to put that into effect, but that will eventually happen. Do you expect to see changes in what those programs are currently being budgeted for? Obviously, the budget was put together, I think, before that was factored in. So.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do as an organization is look at those more conglomerately rather than looking at them in individual silos. Kind of look at them in terms of an accessibility that where I can help vulnerable users, whether bikes or peds. So I know we have several commitments out there that we made with communities and other elected officials that we hoped once those dollars come available to us to start addressing those in the field.
Yeah, I guess the question is if we're expecting a 20% increase in federal aid through formulas, not through the various discretionary programs, can we expect that the FY23 budget allocation for ADA retrofits, which I don't have in front of me, but we can certainly look up together if we want to sit here and do that, will go up by 20% through a supplemental or a budget amendment?
So I hopefully I'm not stepping on Jim's toes here. So from a 20% increase perspective, we have our 3 buckets there, basically from a vulnerable user. So I plan on increasing our focus from the vulnerable users to 20%, as well as focusing on our system preservation related to our assets. So both of those will be going up by 20%, but then a lot of that also involves the priority letters and our CTP process with our local communities and local elected officials. But from a system preservation standpoint, I'm going to handle assets and address those vulnerable users for that 20%.
Yeah, Secretary Ports, it looks like you want to add something.
Yeah, I'll probably add a little bit to that. So keep in mind, it's an estimate about 20%. So we anticipate about $1 billion for highways. So it's going to be in that area. We anticipate about 300 million for transit and 158 million for airports. And then there are some discretionary grants also that would be for the bridge program and other programs like we're talking about now, bicycles, peds, pedestrians and stuff like that. So the two things we have to wait for, you mentioned in one, appropriations, but then the second part that we have to wait for is the rules of the regulations that we have to apply to each of these. So we're still waiting on that also, but that's kind of the priorities that the federal government, meaning Congress and the president, put out for highways, transit, and airports at this time.
Okay. Mr. Minister, I often like to ask you about sort of flood control issues and that kind of resiliency. Can you just give an update on that?
Could you repeat that? I missed.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's my standard question to you about basically dealing with flooding on state highways and flood control issues and resiliency.
Yeah, so we have over 8 million linear feet of pipe that we need to address in some form or fashion across the state. You and I have discussed this. Drainage is not always in the best shape with regard to our assets. So that's our pavements and bridges are in decent shape, but it takes dollars to keep them there. Where we need kind of an influx is in our drainage program. The challenge with that is between a permitting as well as an environmental stewardship standpoint, there's a lot of, what's the best way to put this? Pre-development and design work, concept work that needs to be done ahead of time for us to start delivering that. So we are influxing additional resources into our drainage program. I just got an update on that a couple of weeks ago. But the challenge is the expenditures will not be hitting until later on because right now we're very focused on getting that shelf of projects ready to get out in the field, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Before I turn to Delegate Kittleman, another question for me. This is somewhat specific. You know, Steve did a great job of talking about the bridge program, which I know you and your predecessor, Administrator and Secretary Slater, and Secretary Ports's predecessor, both Secretary Slater and Secretary Ron, were rightly very proud of it. It's a well-regarded program. I did have a constituent inquiry about the cost and time delays of the Seminary Bridge, which is I think goes across the Beltway in my neck of the woods. So I don't want to get into the weeds here, but if I could send you some follow-up questions to try to understand why a $6.2 million project turned into a $13.6 million project before that was in style. I know that's what you're going to tell me everything is now. And why a 14-month project turned into a 50-month project. I'd like to spend a little time nailing that down with you via email. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Great. Secretary Ports, did you want to add something?
No, I was going to say on some of those cases, we do the preliminary inspections every 2 years for our bridge program, and so a lot of that is looking at the facial areas of the bridge. Some of it is core borings and stuff like that. You can find out so much information, but as you get into some of these construction projects and you take a deeper dive, then you start to see that there might be a few more problems with bridges and other parts of our road system. So that's how those projects end up being a little bit more expensive. And of course, some of those things, if we have to replace the steel girders and stuff like that, that takes a lot more time. So we'll be more than happy to circle back with you. I did want to say a little bit about the HURs, but part of this is you have to keep in mind that we have to have state monies available to offset the federal funds. If we do not have those state monies available, we will not be able to spend those federal funds once they become available.
You and I are in strong agreement there about the need to make sure you guys have robust transportation trust funds. We can agree, Mr. Secretary.
Well, that we eat in the same place, it's Sweden, right?
Right, great potatoes. Mr. Secretary, Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. I forgot to do something that I always like to do. Thank you so much for the work on Route 32. It's coming along beautifully. I enjoy it every day. And I do need to pass along one specific compliment that I wrote at the time, but so that the rest of the delegates on this call will know about it. When you first changed how we got out of our Fox Valley and had the road on the side, anyway, there was a very, very dangerous turn left there because we all were used to going straight out and over to the other side. And I called and I talked to several of the people in SHA, and within a couple of hours, they had a very big, dangerous new intersection sign up there, and nobody crashed. So thank you.
That's a good thing.
Thank you,
Delegate Kinnaman, I just want to take the opportunity to answer your earlier question about bicycle fatalities. I will say that over a 6-year time period, Prince George's has the most, and then it's followed by Montgomery, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County having the second most. They're all tied. But Howard County has very, very few. As a matter of fact, one in a six-year time period.
That doesn't surprise me too much, but it's nice to know. Thank you.
Sure.
So Administrator Smith, I want to go through a few of the major projects that are in Exhibit 11. My colleagues and others from around the state don't always get the chance to interact with you this way. So and some of these are on behalf of other folks. It doesn't get nearly as much love as my favorite Beltway, but you guys have been doing a lot of work on the Baltimore Beltway. Could you just provide a brief update on those projects and how that's going, and if you've been able to see improvements yet? Or
Can you all still hear me?
Oh, now we can.
Okay, good. Got a little glitch there in the matrix. So with regard to the transportation systems management and operations that Secretary Ports mentioned, we're still very much in kind of the preliminary stages of that, but what you're going to start seeing probably more this summer is additional work from conduit as well as a stormwater management and drainage purposes from basically I-70 all the way up to 83. A lot of that work's going to be in the median. You won't probably be seeing much of in the sense of gantries for the congested or for the part-time shoulder use until maybe later this fall, but most likely the next spring. But most of this summer is going to be spent on getting that fiber, the conduit in to have those telecommunications we need for the gantry system on the Beltway. So that's kind of where we're at with that project. And we just finished up the Southwest Outer Loop last fall, kind of touched that with that project and have that extended. And I know in a previous hearing, we heard some folks have some feedback on this. I guess that would be the northeast outside of the outer loop. We're looking at some of the super elevation and the cross slope there at a couple exits.
great. Jumping closer to me, the I-270 Innovation Congestion Management Program that, in reference to the metering that Secretary Ports just spoke about. There's 8.6 million in for FY23. Do you know what work is still remaining to be done there on that project?
Yeah, so we've implemented some of the ramp metering, but we've only probably done about a half or a third of that. So we got additional ramp metering that needs to go on a few of those additional ramps, both from an ITS standpoint, but also from a geometric improvement. So you'll be seeing that kind of finish up both on the southbound as well as the northbound direction this spring and summer.
And is that sort of the last slug of that program, or is there more to do on just that? I know there's other stuff on 270, but that specific, congestion management innovation.
Just for that I-270 innovative congestion management, yes.
Great. Still closer to my home, not in my district, MD 97 and Georgia Avenue. Just want to thank Montgomery Hills. Just want to thank SHA and the department for, keeping that project advancing. It's really important to the people in that area. It's been a long time need. So thank you for that. Also want to thank you for the work on the interchange at I-95 and I-495 at the Greenbelt Metro Station. 5 projects were threatened to not go forward if we didn't vote a certain way on a highway project. We did vote that way, and only one of the 5 projects is being funded. This is the one. So thank you for at least doing 20% of what was supposed to be done. And then going down to St. Mary's County, MD5 and Point Lookout Road. There's no money in the budget for FY23 for this project, although it still meets Steve's other criteria for falling in here. Could you just provide an update on that?
For Point Lookout, I know we're transitioning to more of the construction phase this summer. Previously, we were doing a lot of prep work from a permitting standpoint, stormwater management, but we will be widening part of Route 5 down through there to improve congestion and capacity through both to and from Point Lookout.
Okay, but it has $0 budgeted for FY23, so.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify the point that you're making. So I think you're taking two different things and kind of conflating them together. So
I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I will let you respond to my previous point, but I'll just
Okay.
clarify that this is a separate project from the.
Okay.
Before.
all
So if
right.
you want to respond on the 5, let's do that after we just finish up this point about MD5. I'm glad to hear it's moving forward, Administrator Smith. I noticed in the exhibit, it's budgeted for 0 for FY23. So
I'll have to follow back up with you, sir, on that one. I knew we had some construction to do this summer, but I didn't know if it was supposed to be completed before July was done or not.
Okay, we can follow up on that. And Secretary Ports, do you want to respond to my prior point?
Sure. So as I know you're well aware, we have the CTP process and we have a long-term planning process. So the CTP process is within the next 6 years, and that's where we would put funding either for planning, design, or construction. And then what you're talking about is our long-term planning document. We don't put monies into that long-term planning document. We never have. And so I don't know, you're acting as if that's the document we put the money into. We don't. So I just want to make sure
I was just responding to the social media ads I read, Mr. Secretary.
But I want to make sure we're all clear on the actual process that takes place in the transportation department.
Okay. Next one's over in Washington County, Mr. Administrator, which is just I-81. I guess upgrade and widening the status there.
Yeah, so we finished up phase 1 last year, and we're looking to move forward with phase 2. I know we have it funded for design and trying to complete that, but we're looking for opportunities with the IIJA and others to kind of fully give that some traction. But we have design fully funded for that, and looking forward to progress this summer.
Great. And my last one is statewide one, which is the smart traffic signals. I see there's still a little money in FY23 left to go there, but just wanted to hear how that was going, if that had been proving successful and so forth.
Yeah, so we have several different corridors, and some of those are in both in Howard as well as Anne Arundel, and a couple in Baltimore and Hartford County. So we're making progress there, but what I'm trying to do is increase that, maybe not have it under the smart signal umbrella, but use that type of technology across the state to improve congestion without necessarily increasing our footprint or, staying within the footprint of our current payments section.
Thank you. Delegate Kittleman, did you have another question, or is your hand still open before? Okay. Any other questions for the State Highway Administration, Administrator Smith? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Administrator and Mr. Secretary, and to both your teams. Appreciate so much of your time. And I think with that, we are done with our budget hearings for the year. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. And we will see you at our decisions meeting in a few, maybe next week or a few days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. We are adjourned.